There just has to be something interesting about you for me to care, for me to want to read on. Reading on about Winston Smith and how he complains about women, complains about his body, complains about sex. It's just like, oh, Jesus Christ. I don't care. Hi and welcome back to Utopia. We believe that knowledge is power. My name's Zoe Robertson. I'm here to empower you through knowledge and motivation. And I'm not a professor. Let's get to learning. In today's video, we are talking about this book, 1984 by George Orwell. Quickly, I will be doing two videos about this book. I will be doing this video, which is about my opinions on the book, which are my personal opinions. And in the second, I'll just do like a quick summary of the book, or sort of like what the book's about. Fake news, I will actually be summarizing the book at the end of this video, so look out for that. If you saw my New Year's resolutions video or my blog where I also included my New Year's resolutions, you know that one of my New Year's resolutions is to read 52 books this year. And I actually put 1984 on top of the list because, first of all, I've been wanting to read it for probably like a decade, honestly. Like, I've been hearing about it, I've been seeing it at my grandparents' house. I know my grandfather loved that book, and so I've just been wanting to read it, and sort of, I knew a lot about it, but I wanted to know more. And also, if you followed me this December, I did a self-care calendar on TikTok, and one of the days was to start reading a book. And there I showed that I started reading 1984 because it's my boyfriend's favorite book as well. It is to start reading a book. Here I have 1984, which is my boyfriend's favorite, and I gave him a picture of Dorian Gray to read because that is my favorite. Merry Christmas. And there are two reasons why I love reading books that people who are close to me love. First of all, it shows something about the person, and then second of all, you can talk about it. And he had a lot to say about the book after I read it, so I'm glad I read it. Plus, if you've also been following me, you know that I loved Animal Farm, which is another of George Orwell's biggest books. I did a whole video on Animal Farm. I literally posted about Animal Farm on Instagram. That was also like one of the books I really wanted to read. I read it, I loved it. That being said, 1984, I probably had my hopes up because of this. Like I mentioned, I loved Animal Farm. My grandfather loved 1984. My boyfriend loves 1984. It's such a big part of like our cultural history. It's everywhere basically. Yet I just wasn't satisfied with my read at all. And just posting it and posting this title, I feel like a lot of men are gonna come after me. But that is why I also want to like really show why I have the opinions that I have and why I found 1984 to be boring. First of all, I do read a lot of books. I am a book nerd, I read a lot of books, and so obviously I recognize that 1984 is well written and it is a classic. Obviously it's a classic for a reason. The thing is, I feel like it's maybe too much of a classic, like it's everywhere. Since there's so much said about this book already, like it's such a big part of our culture, like everyone knows Big Brother, like Room 101 is a big thing, all of that, since it's so big, nothing really shocked me. I was expecting a super dark, controlled society where everyone was looking at you at all times, where you had no friends, where you have no loved ones, where everything was just cold and meaningless. And that's what the book was. And if I wasn't expecting that, I probably would have been like, oh my God, that's awful, wow. But I was, you know, since 1984 is a really known book. So I was just like, oh, okay, so there's some pain here. Oh, rejection, betrayal. Oh, wow, they're looking at you through the telescreens. I feel like a lot of the book is sort of to be shocking, to be so horrible, but if you already know about that aspect, then it's like, okay. And most of the book is honestly world building. It is building up this cold world, but I know about that world and it's not interesting. It wasn't really interesting for me until like the last 100 pages. The last 100 pages, honestly, I had a lot of things to do. I was like kind of packed and everything. I had to go back to my hometown, but I was just like, I have to read this, and I was just reading, and that was super interesting. And I loved, that sounds awful. I loved the torture scenes and the Stockholm Syndrome, but seriously, it was just so well depicted, and it also had the opportunity for at least one character in this entire book to have somewhat of a personality. He's like, not even the villain, because society is the villain, but he like plays out society's villainous part in the book, and okay, that was a huge spoiler. I can't include that. Anyways, for one person who was sort of like a villain to have a villain personality, it's like, yes, some personality, some harsh lines, something new, something I didn't really know about. The torture scenes, how they do things, interesting. Yet I feel like so much of the book is also like sort of, I don't know if you have this other places, but we had a lot of like naturalisme in Norway in the 1800s, which is like a step beyond realism, where you depicted more like people who were suffering, like the lower class, and you go really into like the gory details of death and pain and filth. And it felt like the book was doing this a lot of the times. And the thing is that like when the book centers around such an unlovable character such as Winston, who's just like, honestly, who cares about him? His ulcer hurting, I'm just like, I don't care. I really don't care. It's just like unnecessary descriptions for me. First of all, I feel like the book would be the exact same without his varicose ulcer that he goes on about. And secondly, I don't like him, so I don't care. Like, he literally talks about wanting or fantasizing about SA on a woman because he finds her attractive, which is like, yes, the society speaking, but it's just like, how am I supposed to feel bad for him? Like, I don't know. There's nothing human about him. So if his ulcer is hurting, I don't care. Personally, also as someone who has a bachelor degree in history, reading all of the history parts of the book was sort of boring. It should probably be more interesting for me. I think it's just because it's not that long ago I finished my bachelor's, so I'm just sort of over it. And then seeing all of these like, oh, the Nazis, the Soviet comrade, I'm like, okay, I get it. Like, it was lived through. Aren't we sort of over? Well, we're not over it, but it's just, for me, when I read a book, if it's about society, I want it to be about society. If I'm reading something dystopian, if I'm reading fantasy, if I'm reading something that's out of society, then I don't want to read about society. Like, in the Hunger Games is in Panem, which was America, but America is no longer, so don't drag on about America. In Ibsen's books, we are in Norway, but it's like the society of Norway, so it's telling you something about Norway. But being in this world that George Orwell has created of Oceania, but then going on and on about Nazis is strange to me. It's like, okay, are we in this world or are we in this world? Like, it's a little bit too realistic for me. It's a little bit too close to home. It's like, I get what you're doing, but it's not even creepy. It's just like, okay. I don't know how to explain it. It's just a lot of the book, it just feels like I'm reading a history book from a parallel dimension, which sounds a lot cooler than I felt it to be. It felt like I was reading a history book, and I'm like, I'm trying to take a break from school. That being said, I do recognize, like I said, I recognize how good this book is. And I do recognize that one of the reasons why I find this book boring is because I've read or seen so many things based on this book. And like I mentioned with The Hunger Games, that is a dystopian novel. I love dystopian novels. I read a lot of dystopian novels with like that YA version. And I believe that this book was like one of the biggest pioneers of dystopian novels. And that is why it seems so boring to me now, because now being 23, I read all of those other dystopian novels, which also included like huge love scenes and fashion moments and everything. Like took this book basically and just embezzled and jeweled, I don't know, and just like made it so much prettier and more fun and engaging. And this is just the real version of that, which isn't pretty and fun and engaging, you know? So it's probably just like, to me, 1984 is like a boring grown-up version of The Hunger Games, sort of. Also, I feel like this started something that I would like to call the gaslight genre. So much of this is about, yeah, basically like with Nazis, you know, how you make a lot of people believe things that just don't make sense to believe, or make one person believe that by making everyone else believe that. You know, sort of like a Jim Carrey movie, the something show. Truman Show. The Truman Show. But more specifically, I was thinking about more like this, like more thriller genre. So it reminded me of Gothica with Halle Berry and Shutter Island with Leonardo DiCaprio. And I personally love Gothica and I hate Shutter Island for basically the same reason why I hate this. It's just that there are no lovable characters. Everything is so bleak. And unlike Gothica, which is in this gaslight genre, but focuses so much on like what happened, what is this like unraveling a mystery, building up a character, Shutter Island in 1984 builds up worlds, whilst the main characters, whether it's Winston Smith or Leonardo DiCaprio's character, whom Leonardo DiCaprio already is boring to me, are the most boringest men ever. Like, there's just nothing. It's just, oh, a regular Joe placed in this situation, but who cares about a regular Joe? Seriously? Like, and I get that's the whole point. You're supposed to be like, what if I were in this man's shoes? Thing is, most of us in this day and age, 2023, like the whole main character syndrome, we don't want to relate to the regular Joe. We don't ever want to believe, not even that we're in this society, but that we could ever be this person. It is also just done to death. Like, as most of us, or I'm assuming young women are watching this, or women, most of women have read novel after novel after novel of the boring girl with no personality, an average face, average brown hair, somehow being swept into romance with the hottest guy on the planet with the fattest bank account. It's like, okay, but wouldn't it be more interesting to be an interesting person with an interesting life and your own personality? If you have your own personality, then you don't have to have the richest, hottest guy. And you don't have to be in the most oppressing society. You don't have to be on Shutter Island for it to actually be interesting. Like, I read Bridget Jones over and over again because Bridget Jones is interesting. Bridget Jones is cool. Bridget Jones is sort of built on that trope, but then she has all these sorts of modern problems, and then also she's just sort of a clumsy idiot, but in the most loving way. And you don't have to be the brightest, you don't have to be the prettiest, you don't have to be the most successful. There just has to be something interesting about you for me to care, for me to want to read on. Reading on about Winston Smith and how he complains about women, complains about his body, complains about sex. It's just like, oh, Jesus Christ. I don't care. It's also very clear that it's written by a man, which is another thing. Like, a lot of times, a lot of things I read, a lot of my favorite books also, like The Process or The Picture of Dorian Gray, are written by men. But one thing is being a man writing for people, another thing is being a man writing for men, and it just felt like this book was like very, very man specific. And thinking back, the people I know who love this book the most are males, and I think it's just written in a way that a lot of men appreciate, with like a lot of detailing and a lot of focus on the world and a lot of focus on the story and just not on the characters, not about the people. But I think women often care more about people, at least I do. And so I just felt like there was nothing really in it for me. And then also there was only like one female character, and she was like not like the other girls. And it's like, oh God, I get it. She's so young. She's so cool. She loves sex. She loves rebelling. But also, she's not very intelligent. She doesn't really know as much as him. She doesn't really care as much as him. And it's, as a woman, I was just like, is this really the only woman we're gonna see really depicted? Like, and it was written in 1949, so not like the other girls. It's probably pretty cool and big back then, but it really isn't now. And that's the whole thing. I feel like 1984 would have been 1,000 times better to read, honestly, like just 50 years ago. But now it's just like so much has changed in a way where it just doesn't feel as directly relevant. Obviously, it's super relevant in society, and that's why I'm glad I read the book, but it's also like so relevant that we already know a lot about it. And these other things that I found out about, I just wasn't really happy to find out about. In conclusion, to me, I felt like this book could have been like an essay. Like, it was really, really intellectual and not very emotional, which is strange because the whole thing is like, look at these people, like what it does to these people, to individuals. Individuals are the ones who suffer, but if you're going to make me care about individual suffering, any individual, you have to make me care about the individual. There was not one single individual to actually feel bad for in the story because they were all so corrupted, they were all basically evil, and they weren't really human at all. Like, either they were just not humans or they were just bad humans. And the whole point is like, oh, society made them bad humans, society made them unhuman. It's like, okay, but now they're unhuman, now society can go its way. I really don't care. If there was just one person, like one child or something that said something that could make you feel like, oh, there's hope. But if there really isn't, and also, I just don't believe that. Like I said to my boyfriend, I get the whole point. I get that, oh, you can't rebel. One person can't do anything. But I don't believe that to be true. Like I said, I have a bachelor's in history. If you go back to any point in history, you see that the only reason why things have changed for the better is because individual people will always be individual people. I believe, honestly, that heroes are born every day. I don't think you can have a society without a hero because you can control who's born. I think some people who are born are just special. And those people will always find a way. Sounds really corny, but like, you know, Pandora's box. In the bottom, there was only one thing left, and that was hope. I believe that there is hope. So the whole point of 1984 is if you get society to this point, then there is no hope. But I don't believe that to be true. I believe that there will be people who understand what's going on, who will stand by that, and who will rally the people. Because at any point in history where things have been bleak, it has seemed like there was no hope. But there is. We wouldn't have women's rights if women and men weren't ready to be tortured, to be killed, to be laughed at, to be sentenced to jail for having those beliefs, for standing up for women's rights. But they did. And that's the thing. Some people always will. That being said, I am glad I read this book because it is just so culturally important, and even though it was my cup of tea, and I won't be reading it again, I still encourage others to do so if they want to. And if you don't want to, then here's my quick summary of the book. Basically, this book is about a society where communism was never defeated, where everywhere you are being watched. There are three types of people in this society. The proles, aka the proletariat, which are just basic everyday working people who nobody cares about, who get just enough food to stay alive but not enough food to actually pay attention. And because of this, they can just do whatever they want, except for that their life sucks. And then you have members of the outer party, which are people who are actively working in favor of that society, rewriting history and spreading information and just keeping it afloat. And then you have the inner party members, which are the people who are making all the decisions and sort of directing history and society and history where it wants it to go. So in this society, there are three countries or states or whatever. You have Oceania, East Asia, and Eurasia. And Oceania is where this takes place, which is sort of Europe, America, and some other parts. And they're always at war, but sometimes they're at war with East Asia, sometimes they're at war with Eurasia. And it just changes. And whether you're at war with East Asia or Eurasia, the people of Oceania always have to believe that they were always at war with those and allies with the other place. This society is built up around hatred of the country they're at war with, and then also people who are against the party and therefore their nation. We have this like figurehead for that, Goldstein, who used to be a member of the party but is now like underground working against society. The people here don't really have much to live for. They're not allowed to be in love. They're not allowed to have sex other than trying to make children, and they're not allowed to say anything against the party. If you say something against the party, then someone will report on you, or the party will see you through a telescreen, basically like a television or a microphone or something, and you will be eradicated. But first you'll be tortured, and then you'll be killed, and then your name will be wiped out of history forever, and everyone has to pretend like you never existed. And one of the things that really works so that people don't have any love is that children are also brought up in this way. So children have to report on their parents if their parents say or do something they're not supposed to do. And you're not allowed to have your own opinions, your own thoughts, or your own hobbies. The only things you can do as a party member is really things that are for the party, like you can join the anti-sex league, you can work on hate week. You can't really, can't write, you can't read things that aren't specific to the party, and all the books, everything you have is fake. Like, they have Shakespeare, but it's not real Shakespeare. It's been rewritten to fit the party. So in this book, we follow Winston Smith, a man I said is the boringest man ever, who works with rewriting articles, or writing articles. Anyways, he's rewriting history all the time. That's his job. And he sort of wants to rebel against the party, so he buys a notebook and starts writing a diary about the things that he's seeing and experiencing, which is super illegal because, history isn't supposed to be one person's account. It's supposed to be the collective mind, and it's rewritten and written as pleases the party. So having that down is very dangerous to the party. And he also tries to find out about how things were before. So he's trying to interview the proles and find out what were things like with capitalism. Was it better? Was it worse? And his biggest act of defiance is this woman that I said he went into SA. She's confesses her love to him, and they have a relationship, and they have sexual intercourse, which is strictly forbidden. He has had that before with his wife, who he has been allowed to go their separate ways from because they didn't have any children and they weren't in love at all, and they only did it because she said they had to, because it's their duty to the party to get children. But now he has real passion and everything. He sort of believes himself to be in love with this woman, Julia, and eventually they are caught in the act and arrested. And that's really actually interesting thing in the book happens, where he's just being tortured and starved and made to feel love for the party and not for Julia, and he has to betray her, she has to betray him. At the end, they are free, but they're going to be killed at some point. You just don't know when. They're just waiting to be killed. He's just drinking this awful alcohol they have called Victory Gin, and she doesn't say specifically, but I believe her to be pregnant by SA. Because the thing is that when you're in room 101, which they were, I mentioned before, it's your biggest fear. So his biggest fear is rats. Her biggest fear, probably throughout what we read in the book, is being SA'd by inner party members who she hates. She hates the inner party members. And she is stiff around the stomach, and her feet are bigger. So, and also she has a scar, so she's probably been lobotomized as well. So it starts with him wanting to defy the party and sort of see a different future for him and the people, and it ends with him just wanting to die, just drinking, waiting for the bullet that will come at some point, which he doesn't know. So to me, this book really reminds me of The Process, which if you haven't seen my video on The Process, you really should. I actually have 2 videos on The Process, or The Trial. Sorry, I always say The Process because it's The Process in Norwegian in German, but it's The Trial in English. So this book really reminds me of The Trial, which I absolutely love. It's just, The Trial is a little more subtle and delicate, and this book is really harsh. And so I prefer The Trial. Other people prefer this book, and it really has to do with the same thing, just a little bit different. This was a very brief summary of the book, but I mean, if you want to read it, then you should, and I'm not going to spoil all the details and go on and on about a book, but that's basically what happens. And I also explain in this video why I found the book to be boring. That being said, those are my thoughts. I hope you enjoyed this video, whether or not you liked 1984, or if you read it so far, and hopefully I will see you soon. Take care.